Hello and welcome back to Talking to the Void. Today is August 8th, 2023, and I'm going to be talking about another subject that's very close to my heart, Star Wars. Now, Star Wars has a long and detailed history, and I can't talk about all of it in one episode, so today I'm going to focus specifically on the Star Wars show, Andor. If you haven't seen it and are planning on watching it, go watch it now and come back to this later because there are spoilers coming. Just like last time, my intro is scripted and there is a general outline for where I'm headed, but beyond that, it's just me rambling to a $25 lapel microphone for however long it takes for me to record this. Although, because I'm covering only one show, this hopefully will not be as long as the first episode of my podcast. So, without further ado, let's get into it. For those of you who don't know, Andor came out in, I believe it was September 2022, maybe it was as early as August, but I'm pretty sure it was September. And it ran for 12 episodes. There are currently rumored plans for a season 2, and a lot of people said that they really liked this show because of the darker, more serious tone. And I would say that the overall consensus, at least from what I heard and saw in my little corner of the internet, is that this was everybody's favorite Star Wars project to date. I should also mention it got a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, and don't know if you really care about Rotten Tomatoes ratings, because I think they're wrong sometimes, but, that was the rating for this show in case that matters to you. But anyway, everybody's favorite Star Wars project to date, supposedly. Everybody loved it, was basically what I was hearing, with a little bit of negativity here and there. I'm here to tell you that I am not one of those people who love the show, and I'll explain why, but first let me give you a brief rundown of the plot. So, the show focuses on Cassian Andor, a character from Rogue One, and this show takes place after Revenge of the Sith and before Rogue One, which, in case you didn't know, was basically episode 3.5 in the Star Wars movie canon. We only know Cassian Andor from Rogue One, because it's the only movie of the Star Wars franchise that he's in currently. Spoiler alert, he dies in Rogue One, which is why that's the only movie he's been in, and the show Andor was meant to show his journey to becoming part of the rebellion and, ending up where he was at in Rogue One. Cassian himself, during the show, is a gambler with a lot of debts. The show really kicks off in the first episode where he is looking for his missing sister, ends up getting into an altercation with kind of the police in Star Wars. Kind of the police. Pretty dang close to the police, but not quite the police. And he gets into a fight with them, semi-accidentally, kills both of them, and then, because he killed them and they work for the government, basically, he has to spend time on the run. He goes to space prison for a while for an unrelated crime, and ends up becoming a rebel, sort of, by the end of the show, but there's a lot more to his journey, which is why they're planning on having a season 2. So that's basically that's kind of a summary of the plot. There's a lot of things that happen in between. There's a lot of specifics, but that is most of what you need to know. I would say that the main reason that I didn't love the show is because it felt like the whole show was mostly world building and very little character building, and I am a sucker for character-driven shows, books, movies, whatever. Because, in my opinion, you can have a relatively crappy plot, but if you have just amazing characters, you can sometimes get away with having a crappy plot. I mean, not all crappy plots are fixable, but characters are really, really important for somebody's enjoyment and understanding of a show, movie, etc. So my main issue with the show is that there is very little character building, at least in my opinion, and as a result, I didn't care about a single person in that show. Which is really weird for me to say because I am the kind of person who gets weirdly attached to just random objects. For example, I have apologized to books after dropping them. Like, if that doesn't tell you something about my character, I don't know what does. At least so far as this is concerned, I would consider myself a very empathetic person, but I did not care about any of these characters. And I think part of the point, and actually part of the reason why people like the show, is because there's no truly likable character in the show. There is no perfect character. But here's the thing. I like the fact that this show is trying to be more grounded and more realistic. We don't just have amazing protagonists who always look fabulous, cape flowing in the wind kind of stuff. Instead, we have realistic characters who get dirty, have a bad time, all of that. Um, Things don't go their way, people die, sometimes in very tragic ways. Um, Even if we don't really care about the character all that much. Oh, I will say there were one or two characters that I semi cared about, but not nearly as much as I would have hoped to from this show, if that makes sense. So, um, yeah, I didn't really care about the characters because they spent all of their time and resources focusing on the plot and the world, which, to be fair, is quite cool. Like, the design of the show, the aesthetic of the show is very more of like the grounded sort of Star Wars, not just all of like, the Death Star and all its giant amazingness, that kind of thing. It's not just a bunch of epic space battles. It's, actual people suffering under the rule of the Empire and stuff, and I think it's because of that realism that people like the show, but I can't care about the suffering of the characters if I don't care about the characters. And I kind of lost the point a little bit in my rant there, but my point is that I don't care about any of the characters. I can still love characters who are imperfect. I can still genuinely care about characters who are not necessarily good people, who make a lot of mistakes and are sometimes kind of really bad people. I can still care about those characters. But this show failed to make me care about them. So, like with Andor, we're supposed to care about him, I would assume, because he's the main character. His journey is the main journey that we're following over the course of the show. But do I care? No. And why is that? Because I don't have a reason to care about him. The show did not give me a reason to care about him. It seemed like we were just supposed to care about him because he's the main character, and that was it. I didn't feel like there was anything particularly lovable or redeeming about the character. I mean, like, the acting for most of the characters was really good, but there wasn't any particular redeeming quality that made me go, ah, yes, I should care about this character. I mean, I guess he loves his adopted mother, even though that situation is pretty weird. By the way, it's weird because she adopted him because it was something like she found him on a ship that had crashed on his home planet where he lived with a tribe of kids, and he, I think, was sabotaging it because he was upset that the people who had landed there killed one of his friends in the tribe of children. And I forget exactly how it went down, but I'm pretty sure that his adopted mother knocked him out and just kind of took him with her to her home planet and raised him as her own. And I'm like, that's possibly kidnapping. I mean, there were no parents involved, but like she just kind of stole a child. And does nobody else find that weird? I'm guessing maybe she never told Andor that that's how that went down? Because that was just really strange. Like most people don't just go, ah, yes, a child. I am going to kidnap this child and raise it as my own. Because the thing is, she's not necessarily a bad mother. She's just a seriously questionable person for having taken him in the first place. It's just a really, really bizarre situation. So, yeah. Anyway, all that to say, he cares about his adopted mother, and he cares about the little droid who kind of helps take care of his adoptive mother. Did I say adopted mother at some point? I meant adoptive, whatever. But I'm like, just because this character cares about somebody doesn't mean we should care about them. You can have an utterly despicable villain who still loves their mother, but that doesn't necessarily make me want to care about the villain. There has to be more than that. Just because characters care about each other doesn't make me want to care about those characters. And if you can hear the plane in the background right now, I'm really sorry. It is very noisy and just keeps going. There's just been a lot of planes recently. But anyway, just because characters care about each other doesn't make me want to care about them necessarily. Like, they have to have a motivation, and that's the other thing. It might actually really be this. This might be the heart of what I'm trying to get at. I don't understand Cassian's motivation throughout most of the show. At least to start, anyway. At least to start, okay. I understand his... Okay, that's the key. I'm figuring it out as I go, I guess, in this podcast, rather than having all of my opinions set. But to me, it really does seem like he doesn't have an underlying driving motivation. He has individual situational motivations, and I mean, maybe you could argue that his motivation is just to do what's right for him, but he puts himself in a lot of dangerous situations in the process and, you know, goes out of his way to do what he thinks is right at times, even if I wouldn't agree with what he thinks is right. It's just kind of this bizarre jumble of things, and like, it's not that it's too much of a bizarre jumble of good and bad in each character, because that's fine. Like, confused characters struggling between the dark and the light, if you will, the good and the bad, are fascinating and intriguing a lot of the time, but I just don't understand his core motivation. I mean, because it would seem like it's just to benefit himself, but there are things that he does that clearly don't benefit him, and that just doesn't make sense, and maybe the whole point is that people are confusing messes who don't make sense, but that just didn't translate well for me. I didn't care about anybody, so I kind of didn't care about the show. So that was, I guess, the large problem for me. As another example of, how little I ended up caring about the characters, I just reread the general plot of each episode as a reminder of what happened, and I completely forgot about certain subplots with characters that we were supposed to care about, and I also realized that I had forgotten most of the names of the characters. Whereas if there were a truly memorable character that I cared about, or even just a character that I didn't care about but who was memorable, I probably would have remembered their name. And some of these characters whose names I'd forgotten, when I read the scenarios that they were in, I was able to deduce what they looked like. I was able to remember what they looked like and be like, oh, it was that person. But otherwise, I just kind of forgot about their existence, which should really tell you something, I would think. But yeah, I would just say that my main, I will continue talking about other specific complaints I had with the show, but my main complaint is that I didn't care about really any of the characters, because either they were just disastrous messes that I couldn't relate to or really care about, some of them were just outright terrible, creepy, whatever people, and some I just didn't understand enough to care about them, like the main character, Andor. I didn't understand him. Like, I understood the character, but not on such a fundamental level that I would care about them, or maybe it's just that I did understand the character, but still have no reason to care about him. It's just this really bizarre thing as a viewer to not care about any of the characters, really. And on kind of along those lines, there's some political nuance throughout the show. I think another reason why people really like the show is it dove more into the politics of Star Wars, some more of the, room where it happens kind of stuff that you don't see in most of the Star Wars entries. And so there's this political nuance. It's supposed to create drama. Some of it is also like socio-political nuance more specifically, but I didn't care enough about the characters to really care about the drama, the political drama, the political nuance they're experiencing either. I didn't care about the drama, and I didn't care about them, and I didn't care about how the drama was affecting them, because I didn't care about them or the drama. It was just this really bizarre thing for me as a viewer. But anyway, I'm going to pull up my notes that I took while watching the show, just to remind myself of some of the other complaints that I had about it. Oh, so one of my main complaints is also that the show felt really disorganized to me. This is something I forgot because I didn't care enough about the show to remember it, apparently. There are frequent jumps between reality and Cassian's past, as well as between other scenes, and for me as a viewer, that was kind of jarring. I was like, okay, why are we flashing back right now? Like, it wasn't in a dream, it didn't always feel totally prompt. It was just like, okay, here we are in the past, with no explanation. Great. And I also, those flashbacks were for filling in Cassian's backstory when he was a child in the tribe of children on that one planet. But I didn't totally understand. Okay, so I understood all of what they conveyed in the flashback scenes. I followed the story, even though the children were speaking, their own language and stuff. It was all very clear to me, so that was well done. But the flashback scenes still don't explain anything to me about who Cassian really is at his core, or why we as the viewer should care about him. I feel like in part the creators of the show were riding on like the nostalgia or the familiarity of the character. Like, oh yeah, you remember this guy from Rogue One? Well, this is his story. I feel like they were kind of riding on that wave of, oh, look, it's somebody that you don't know a whole lot about. You want to know more about them. And like, yes, that kind of works, but only to a certain extent. Because if by the end of the show I still don't care about him, it just I feel like you've kind of failed in your mission as a storyteller then if I don't care about anybody in the show, especially the main character that the show is about. I should care about them, but I don't. It's just so bizarre. I've said this already, Cassian's motive is unclear. He just has situational motives, the underlying driving force beneath his character, which, as an example, to kind of provide a counter to my argument, a character whose underlying motivation is really clear is Captain America. He's just like this paragon of virtue and goodness, and I would say that his underlying motive, through the through line of his character, really the heart of his character, is justice. He cares about what's right, doing the right thing. He has a strong moral compass. I would say that's the core of his character, and that is very clear in everything that he says and does. Cassian, on the other hand, just has situational motives and no clear underlying driving force. Maybe self-preservation is it, but that's just kind of a basic human instinct that you generally assume most characters have, and not like some deep emotional or moral or religious or whatever kind of need a character might have that needs to be met, but that wasn't clear to me for Cassian. So like as an example of one of his situational motives, in the first episode, it was very clear that he was on a mission to figure out where his sister was. Or is, rather, because she had gone missing several years ago when he was separated from the tribe of children. Forcibly by his adoptive mother, which is still just really bizarre for me. So he stops at a brothel to get some information, but then gets into the fight with the people whom he later kills, and then, that sets off the whole chain of events of him running away, eventually getting caught by the authorities for a completely unrelated and really something that's not a crime. It's a whole weird thing. But then I really thought that the sister plot point was going to be important, and honestly, family, or, a desire to have a solid, cohesive family, a desire for connection with somebody or reuniting with somebody that he lost in this case, that is a strong driving force. The desire for, you could possibly pare that down to just a desire for love, to love somebody, to be loved by somebody, because it's a loved one that he's missing, and that's why he's looking for her. But then they just kind of don't mention the sister again for several episodes, and then the next time that they mention her, Cassian's adoptive mother just went, oh yeah, she definitely died, stop looking for her. And that's the end of that. That is where that storyline ends, and it just feels like such a waste. Because even amidst, like all of his other shenanigans that he gets up to, if finding his sister was still at the heart of everything he was doing, which it wasn't, by the way, because running from the authorities was more important to him, I feel like the show would have been infinitely more compelling. People are, that's me included, by the way, are suckers for a good story about, family and reuniting with loved ones, and, I don't want to say family drama, but, family relations and how they are good and how they are bad, and sometimes just neutral. Like, it's compelling, but this plot line, this story, just disappears. It ends so abruptly, and I mean, that is the case in real life sometimes, unfortunately, but it just didn't feel earned or warranted. And also, I mean, I'm still not sure if Cassian actually knows that he was essentially kidnapped from the planet by his adoptive mother. I would have to assume that he had figured that out at some point, unless she concocted some story about rescuing him and, like, I saved you kind of thing. And so he views her as a hero and a mom in that way. But I lost my point in all of that, but I'm just frustrated. This is kind of just turning into a giant rant about why I don't like the show. I do have to point out that it's a good show in the sense that it goes in a new direction, and it's new and it's innovative. It's just not a good show for the reason that I don't care about any of the characters, and I don't care about the show, and if you really love a show, you're gonna care about it, but I don't. So, yeah, the sister plot point just disappears altogether, and I don't know why Cassian takes his mother's word for it, because then it's just never talked about ever again. Like, his sister apparently is not that important, even though she was important enough for him to be looking for her, or maybe it was just an excuse to get away. It's just this really bizarre thing. The whole show just feels weird like that. It just feels incomplete, if you will, and maybe there's an artistic reason for that, but I'm not seeing or getting it, apparently. So after looking for his sister and accidentally killing the guys, it seems like his motive switches to evading capture by the authorities for the semi-unintentional murders of the two men. The one he does deliberately shoot, but that's just to get rid of the witness. The other one, I think he killed that one by accident. It's a mess. This whole show feels like a mess, honestly. But anyway, I'm scrolling through my notes now, trying to remember where I'm attempting to go with this. Oh, I think that more backstory on the tribe of children would have been helpful to the story, because it would have helped me to care more about them and about Cassian's past, but instead it's just actually really largely glossed over. How did they just become a bunch of random children wandering around without parents? I want to know that. You know, like, what did we miss? What happened off screen that was important that is just not talked about, that should have been on screen, in my opinion? But, oh well. Let's see. Oh, hang on, this is important. So I'm just actually going to go ahead and read this note because I think I worded it quite well. I said, to improve this show, so I'm not just criticizing, I have ideas of why I think it's bad, but also how it could have been better. To improve the show, I might have started off with Cassian's backstory as a child to establish who this character is, then relate something about his situation then to his situation now. So essentially come from the flashback to the present, that way the shifts between them aren't so jarring. And then, like, we'll figure out where the show's going. When I wrote this, I said, to be fair, I don't yet know where the show's going or the story is going. I mean, I do now. But I would also switch the focus to be more on his sister and avoid the confrontation with the officers in the first episode. So, obviously, I know where all of that went, because I finished watching the show, but I still stand by my point that the focus should be more on his sister, or not his sister specifically, but his relationship to his sister and why she matters so much to him, even though they've been separated all these years. That would be really important and compelling. Anyway, I also wouldn't jump between scenes, like I mentioned, and I would focus more on the characters than the plot, because yes, plot is important. If you have a really, really, really bad plot that just nobody can care about, then it's going to suck regardless of how good your characters are. But if you focus more on characters and have a meh to kind of bad plot, you can still make it work, and in fact, sometimes it actually works out really well because the characters carry the show, and you care about the characters, so even though the plot is really bizarre, you're still rooting for the characters. There's another difference. I said that's another difference between this show and a Star Wars show that I do love, which I will talk about in another podcast episode, The Mandalorian. Yes, The Mandalorian has a plot, but the main focus is on the characters and how they interact with the world and how they grow. The plot is something that happens to them to reveal more about their characters, not just for the sake of action or world building. There's always a character element involved somewhere. I guess that says something about my preferences in shows. Action and character-driven stories are just more compelling to me. And along those same lines, I would also make Cassian's relations to the side characters more meaningful with more emotional context than just, stated words. Because it currently feels like the side characters are just there to advance the plot. Spoiler alert, they basically are. And at that, the plot isn't that complicated. I mean, the plot does thicken, if you will, at some points, but it's quite easy to explain the plot. I summarized the plot in basically a sentence at the beginning of this podcast, so, and that's with all of the weird twists and turns and whatnot. Because we don't have a good sense of why we should care for Cassian or any of the other characters, the plot doesn't really have any emotional weight and the stakes don't feel very high. There need to be good stakes. Not necessarily high stakes, but there need to be significant stakes, reasons for you to root for the characters, reasons for you to care about the characters and worry about their safety or well-being, things like that. but the stakes didn't really feel very high throughout basically the entire thing. There were bits where the stakes were higher, but because I still didn't care about Cassian, the stakes didn't feel particularly high for me as a viewer because I didn't really care what happened to him. Obviously, that's another thing. Watching the show, you know he's not going to die because he has to show up in Rogue One, which takes place later, and so some of the peril that he ends up in is not particularly, it doesn't seem very perilous as the viewer, because you're like, well, he has to get out because he ends up elsewhere by the time of Rogue One. I mean, we don't know how far out that is, at least I don't remember, and I don't know if they state specifically how far out the events of Andor are from the events of Rogue One, but my point still stands. Anyway, my general thoughts after finishing the show. This is one of the darkest / most adult, put that in quotations, adult, entries in the Star Wars universe to date. I like the gritty feel of the show, but by the end of it, I still don't care about Cassian as a character nearly as much as I should, and I will keep saying that because that is my main issue with the show, is I don't care. I just don't care enough about literally anything in the show. Which is really, really sad for me to say because I did want the show to be good. I wanted to have another Star Wars show to be like, yes, I am ready for a season 2. But I just didn't, and it was so sad for me. Anyway, by the way, the adoptive mother dies. I have to mention a little something more before I finish reading my final thoughts on the show from my notes. His mother dies, and he ends up, after several things like escaping prison, he comes back to to his home planet, ish, not the one he grew up on as a child, but the one where his adoptive mother took him for the rest of his childhood. His mother dies, he returns there for the funeral, and during the funeral, there's a giant hologram of her giving an epic, rousing speech, essentially encouraging people to revolt against the Empire, and then it turned into kind of this epic battle royale finale that was actually really powerful and good. Kudos to whoever composed the music for that scene, because the music really made that scene. I mean, the scene would be powerful with kind of meh music, but the music is really what drove that scene home, because there was a whole marching band for Cassian's adoptive mother's funeral, and they essentially start playing this really somber funeral march that kind of turns into a battle song, a battle cry essentially for the people, and then there's a battle royale of the citizens versus the people who are part of the Empire, who have been occupying their planet for roughly half the series. But anyway. Overall, again, here we are. Same general message that I keep repeating throughout literally this entire podcast that you're probably tired of hearing. I just didn't feel, and I put feel in like little stars to emphasize it, I didn't feel anything in particular while watching this show. And I watch shows and movies to feel things, to learn things, to enjoy things. And it's not a bad show. It's not a terrible show. I have seen much, much worse shows than this. This was just not it for me personally. Anyway, that is kind of the bulk of my thoughts. I'll also just mention some other random things that I remember about the show just because they stuck out for me. Firstly, the two characters that I did care about in the show, not as much as I really would have liked to in a proper show, but the characters that I did care about were this guy who's kind of the leader of the group of inmates that Cassian is with when he gets sent to prison. The leader of them genuinely cares about his men, and he genuinely cares about his men, tries to encourage them, and, he just tries to keep his head down and get his work done. And then at the end, when everybody breaks out and stuff, they have to swim away because they're kind of on like a floating mechanical, like it's a building that's kind of its own island. They have to swim, and then the tragic reveal is that the prison group leader guy that helped Cassian with the prison rebellion in the first place can't swim, so he gets left behind and probably dies there, or is at least recaptured and still forced to work there. So I'm trying to figure out exactly why this character mattered so much to me. Well, I shouldn't say so much, but why I cared about him. And caring about other people is not a good justification for liking a character, as I've said already. He cares about his men, but that is not the only reason why I like him as a character, obviously. There has to be more than that. I think it's not just that he cares about his men, it's that he truly wants the best for him, whereas characters can love or even just like each other, but not really want the best for each other. But he really did want the best for his men. He's really just trying and doing his best, and maybe that's why I didn't like the other characters, because honestly, a lot of the other characters made poor and honestly quite dumb decisions at times, and it was kind of a disaster to watch, but this guy knew what he was doing, made smart decisions, genuinely cared about people. Also, he was played by the same guy who voiced Gollum, which doesn't make it a plus for me just because of that, but like I recognize the actor. He's a good actor. He did a great job with the role. Andy Serkis is his name. But I think it's the combination of the fact that he genuinely cares about people and wants the best for them, and he is really just doing his best and makes smart decisions. And and here's another thing. He is genuinely very torn up when his men die, and I think another thing when like different characters die. I think another thing that differentiates him from others, at least in the caring about others department, is that I know it's complicated because this show is supposed to be more like real life, and this is not necessarily always true in real life. The characters that this character cares about are also mostly good people just trying to do their best, whereas some of the, like, for example, Cassian, his mom, Cassian cares about his mom, but she's a really questionable person considering she basically kidnapped him. So, yeah. Anyway, so I think it's the fact that he really tries to be a good person, not just that it's that he tries. I think it's really the trying part and the caring part together, because I feel like most of the other characters don't have that. They don't have both the caring, like genuine caring, and also trying their best or like doing their best. I don't know. Maybe it's just because he's a better character, like morally in some ways than others, but maybe it's also just the acting. I mean, the more that I think about it, it's like I can pick out reasons why I like the character, but it's hard for me to explain exactly why that sets him fully apart from the others. And I mean, I suppose it doesn't really, because I wasn't like crying and in tears because, you know, he couldn't swim or whatever, but I was like, oh, we don't get to see that guy anymore. It was like a bit of an emotional moment, but it wasn't anything like some of the other movies I've seen where I'm literally bawling my eyes out during certain scenes. Anyways, that was one character that I cared about. The other character that I cared about, oh, you know what? I think I figured it out. I think the reason why I really like this character is A, because he's a better character than most of the other characters, and he also has a very clear motivation, a very clear through line, and it's a combination of self-preservation, but also helping others to stay alive, just trying to make the best of things. So I think it's that he also has a clear motivation, whereas the others, their motivations were a little more muddled throughout most of the show. Okay, and then the other character that I liked who also has the similar, like, through line or whatever, he died. He was one of the characters on the planet where Cassian helps a group of people to rebel against, like, an imperial base or whatever, so there's, like, a tribe of people there who want to practice one of their religious ceremonies that the Empire was otherwise going to forbid, if I remember correctly, just because it broke one of their rules that they came up with. And so he also helps them steal, like, munitions and stuff there. So it's kind of a heist-ish that they try to pull off. And one of the characters who helps pull off the heist is this guy who is really passionate about stopping the Empire and wrote a freaking political pamphlet on it. Basically, the anti-imperial version of the Communist Manifesto, if you will. Like, it's a manifesto. He has like this whole idea of what society should be like, and if you listen to it, it reads, because he reads some of it, it reads exactly like a manifesto. It just, yeah, it's a political document that he made, and he's so passionate about it. He cares so much, and maybe that's another thing. It doesn't feel like the characters fully care all that much, the other ones, whereas the two characters that I like in this show, at least somewhat, they have a clear motivation, and they genuinely care about something evident. It's not that the other characters don't care, it's just their motivations are unclear and, or, no pun intended, I promise, they don't have a clear motivation, or they don't have a clear guiding factor, a clear through line to their character. Anyway. There it is again. Same general ideas that I just kind of keep repeating, but in different ways, I guess, throughout literally this entire podcast. Same ideas in different words with different examples, but same core of the show. Some other honorable mentions from the show are this creepy yandere-ish stalker dude who is obsessed with one of the Imperial officers who's kind of like the Spanish Inquisition is how I'd describe them. But he's obsessed with this lady, saves her life, and he is just so creepy. He stalks her. He, actually stalks her, I should mention, and he also just looks kind of insane, but I think it's in part because he wasn't sleeping for part of the show. Anyway, honorable mention because he was so horrible. He's also very much a brown noser and stuff, so, anyway, he kisses up to other people, and he's just a really unlikable person. And then finally, last honorable mention before I wrap this thing up is there's this horrifying torture method that they use on one of the characters where basically they lock this person in a room and subject them to listening to a recording of the screams of children, like alien children from another planet, when their world is being destroyed, and it basically just shatters them completely. And oh my gosh, it is actually the most terrifying thing. I actually felt for that character in the moment, even if I didn't love the character. I was like, oh, wow, that is a really horrible thing to have to go through. And, you see how, broken she is afterwards, and kudos to the actress who played her, but wow. So yeah, honorable mention to the horrifying torture method. It would be kind of neat to see that make a comeback in other Star Wars entries, just because it is so absolutely terrible. But yeah, so I would say to wrap this thing up, my gosh, this thing is so much shorter than the previous one that I made. I would just say to wrap it up, the main reasons why I didn't like Andor is that I didn't really care about most of the characters because it was more plot focused and the characters didn't really have clear motivations, and it didn't really seem like they had anything in particular that they really strongly cared about. My praises for it that I think the other people who really like the show would praise are its political nuance and its exploration of the political side of Star Wars rather than just the epic, lightsaber battles and space battles and things like that. It did a lot of world building work that was quite good, honestly. It's just they happened to do it at the expense of characters, when this to me seemed like it would be a very character-driven show, considering the title of the show is literally the name of one of the characters, and that character's the main character. But I think that that's most of what I have to say on the subject. I'm sure I'll probably think of something later, but thank you again for listening to this episode of Talking to the Void, and I will talk to you in the next one.